Games are impactful, and they have never ceased to be. As our consoles and our PCs, our laptops and our small little portable gaming devices get more powerful over the years, we get to feel and experience amazing games that leave a mark on us. A lot of you who know me know that Deltarune is one such game, and even Time Splitters. But above that, there's a game that's left its mark on me very early on. Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. For those familiar with gaming, you'll know how important this game is, but for those who are unaware, Metal Gear Solid 2 is one of the most famous games of all time, renowned for the absolute hype it had around it at the time, its plot and the impact it left on gaming as a whole. It's a game that has continued to stay really relevant to this day. But unlike a lot of games, Metal Gear Solid 2's impact continues to exist way after its release date. For a long time, April 30th has become an important date in gaming history, a day where fans of Metal Gear Solid 2 come to celebrate, and a day that many keep in mind as something to always remember. But why is this the case? What's the reason for it? Why do people care about this particular date related to the game? Join me on this episode of CRT Dreams, where we discuss the impact of April 30th, Metal Gear Solid 2's day, and really delve into it. Get some snacks and a drink, and let's dive on in. Dates are important in the global landscape of the gaming world. We celebrate anniversaries of franchises or games, even a community or two, based around them. Gaming means so much to a lot of people, myself included. While I play less than I used to me and many others, remembering those dates is something that we hold to the highest value, to complete and utter importance. It goes to show the level of care we have for such things, but why does it particularly matter for Metal Gear Solid 2 of all things? The thing is that there are a variety of reasons as to why April 30th is important. So many reasons. But to understand the reasons, we have to navigate the history of where this obsession even, this fixation on April 30th truly began. How did this appreciation for April 30th in the context of Metal Gear Solid 2 begin? Where could it have begun? What's the root origin? Let's discuss that, so we can get to understanding why this all exists in the first place. Just to make it clear, there will be some slight spoilers for the game. If you wish to play the game for yourself to understand what I mean, please go for it. It's a fantastic game, and this video is felt a little more by playing it and understanding exactly what I'm trying to get at. However, I will not go too far with spoilers, so don't worry. I will notify when spoilers come up, so you don't have to worry, and I'll include a timestamp to skip. Anyway, let's go. As I dug into the topic, it felt fitting that a Google search would be the first action I'd take, and the possibility of finding the root origin came to mind. Is it possible if I could find it? Was there even an origin? These questions spiraled in my head, and I had an inherent objective to find potentially where the impact of April 30th stemmed from, outside of the game itself. There's some inherent value here already from a quick Google search, but a lot of it is quite spoilerific. However, it shows that the impact of the date is immediately here. The questions that get recommended are of note. It shows immediately just how far the impact is, but this is on the mainline surface level with a simple Google search. By digging around for this year too, 2021, I was able to find both a 4chan thread archived and a Reddit post on r/Metal Gear Solid, the subreddit on Reddit for the Metal Gear franchise, which has been around for approximately a decade now. Both posts on 4chan and Reddit are pretty tongue-in-cheek about the date, although the care for the date is certainly there. Moving backwards 2 years into 2019, I came across something unexpected. A post of my own. Yeah, apparently I had asked about the date 2 years ago, and I received some interesting responses, especially from two users, Kaid Antonio and Rendo Demisec. To quote them both respectively, I started celebrating and going to Federal Hall in person about 10 years ago. Celebrating fictional dates is usually normal for pop culture fandoms, but dates from stories, events that technically take place in the real world settings might be more meaningful, especially for fans who live in some proximity to the places involved. I don't remember if anyone started this after the game's launch. I've been celebrating it since launch, but that's because it's also my mother's birthday. In fact, that's how I remember her birthday every year. Each year I send my mom the same picture of the codec call between Jack and Rose, asking if she remembers what tomorrow is on the 29th, and asking if she knows what today is on the 30th. I don't think I saw it happening anywhere else until around 2010/2011. I can't say it didn't happen before then, but that's the earliest I can remember. End both quotes. For what seems to be a usual date to others on the outside, the more that you dig into it, the more of an impact it's had on people when you look into the perspectives of fans like these two. Keep these responses in mind, by the way, they're important for later. After this, I dug further into the past. After all, there was already some interesting finds when it comes to the date itself and the game in 2021 and 2019, surely there was more. The comments from the two Reddit responses intrigued me with the possibility of more, and indeed, I was able to find more. It seems that the search for the impact of the day was going to lead me to many a place. I had already been on 4chan, I had been on Reddit, and apparently now 9gag. A post from there in 2018 celebrates the day alongside the game. What stuck out to me here was the amount of upvotes, or votes, the post had, showing to a degree that there is certainly love for the significance of the date, especially in places that you might not expect. From here, I dug further, leading myself back to the Metal Gear Solid subreddit I mentioned before for 2017 and 2016. The first post was another celebratory post about the date, with a comfy nod to the fact that the date in-game was the day that Raiden, one of Metal Gear Solid 2's protagonists, met Rose, his lover. The other post was intriguing, however. It was an overall review of sorts of the series by a user on the subreddit, so not directly related to the date that it's fixated on. However, one line particularly stood out to me here. Quote, "I also made sure to finish the game on April 30th last year." End quote. This is referring to Metal Gear Solid 2, for context. Tying into this, posts from 2013 and 2012 echo this sentiment highly. The 2013 post, which also happens to be the earliest mention of April 30th on the Metal Gear subreddit, interestingly enough, celebrates the day by bringing up the first mention of April 30th between Raiden and Rose in the game, the comment section being full of Metal Gear fanatics discussing the date. The 2012 post I was able to find was, interestingly, a cache of an IGN thread post by a user known as Loaf of Bread, wishing people a great April 30th. While it had been obvious from everything so far that the date held massive importance to the game and the Metal Gear fanbase, seeing these two showed that there is a significant community feel amongst others when it comes to the date itself. Definitely celebratory. I wouldn't say it's as much as Christmas per se or a national holiday, but it's definitely there, and it's definitely comfy to say the least. Everything after this point is extremely murky. Due to the fact that the internet is vast, it's hard to really tell if what I've discovered so far from here are the only mentions. As the internet and the Metal Gear fanbase are vast, it's very possible that there are links that are hidden or have fallen into the cracks of the internet or archived. From here, nonetheless, the impact of the date can be understood even more. Two links I was able to dig around for in the year of 2009, showed that by now the date itself of April 30th had apparently already been established as a date to celebrate in the context of Metal Gear Solid 2, if this page is to be believed. The other link that I mentioned that I was able to find is perhaps one of the more comprehensive detailings of the date, and the in-game significance it has. Located on an old blog from 2009, it details several narrative elements and the player's role in such elements concerning the date itself in terms of the game, offering a more interestingly cynical connection to the game and the date itself. More on this later since it has a lot of interesting points, and admittedly we're gonna go into spoiler territory when we talk about that. The final link that I was able to dig up was from 2003, the closest to 2001, which was when Metal Gear Solid 2 was released. In the post itself, which is on NeoSeeker, the poster discusses the possibility of the date being connected to the PlayStation 2's internal clock, among other details. To quote them directly, "In the original Sons of Liberty game, do you remember when Rose would always go on about, 'Do you know what tomorrow is?' or something along those lines? Well, in the original game, I seem to remember the date she said being sometime in March. While I was playing through Substance recently, the date she was saying was April 30th. Now, I know this may sound a really stupid and irrelevant question, but a long time ago on the Game Winners MGS forum, there was a gang of people trying to find out if there were any more secrets in the game. There was a lot of ideas flying around, and one of them was changing the PS2's internal clock to certain dates mentioned in the game. One of these dates was the one mentioned by Rose. Obviously nothing happened when the date was changed, but if Hideo and Co took the time and money to re-record Rose, maybe something is meant to happen when you play the game on April 30th. Is there anyone out there with the original Sons of Liberty game who can confirm the date mentioned by Rose? Or maybe my memory is playing tricks with me because I'm not getting any younger, and I'm trying to find conspiracy theories and everything. Either way, I'll still try it tonight if I get the chance, but if I'm being really honest with myself, I don't expect anything to happen." End quote. The thread was alive with speculation and communal support, but what interests me the most is the mention of the Game Winners forums. This is something that I've not heard of before. While this NeoSeeker page was the earliest I could find in terms of mentioning April 30th alongside Metal Gear Solid 2, in terms of that kind of context, the mention of these forums seems to indicate that there was more before this, and the mention of a group of people trying to find more secrets within the game immediately caught my eye. However, as soon as I found this lead, it fell apart pretty quickly, as the forums for Game Winners was shut down 4 years ago as of the time of this video. While it's highly possible that, judging by the writing on the NeoSeeker post and the fact that there was a Game Winners forum post that most likely predated it, it's highly possible that 2001 to 2003 is the earliest point where April 30th had its importance to fans of the game. However, remembering the Reddit comments I mentioned earlier, it's highly probable that the date had immediate importance to begin with, due to certain matters in the game, certain story elements, and it's also highly possible that offline fan groups existed that kinda had an obsession with the date too, giving people the incentive perhaps in the first place to post online about it. With the history noted down, what remains is a simple question that pervades all of this. Why is it important in the first place? Why does it matter? This is a question that in all likeliness, your perspective is going to be naturally different about this, depending on if you know of the game, if you've played it, or you haven't and are totally new to an admittedly very large scale, sometimes overwhelming video game series. But regardless, it's an interesting question. With all this history I have just noted down, why is it important in the first place? The thing is that gaming is home to a lot of dates in this scene where people celebrate the history of them, the history of something. As people love these games and franchises dearly, people naturally gravitate towards those important days to celebrate such monumental occasions like game releases or anniversaries. Super Mario, for example. That's a franchise that celebrated its 35th anniversary not too long ago as of the creation of this video. Same with Sonic the Hedgehog, it celebrated its 30th anniversary around this time, as of the time of this video. The point stands. People celebrate these occasions, and people have celebrated the many anniversaries of Metal Gear Solid 2. The game ages, and people care deeply about celebrating the existence of the game. It applies to many a game. I apply it to Deltarune every Halloween pretty much. But celebrating a game that isn't the anniversary of the game's release is intriguing to me, and I bet to outsiders certainly so too. It's really not often in which people celebrate something that isn't the anniversary of a game. So, taking this into account, Metal Gear Solid 2's release date was November 13th, 2001, nowhere near April 30th. So why does this one matter? Within the game itself, the date of April 30th holds significance. During the early portions of this part of the game, known as the Plant Chapter, the protagonist of this part of the game, known as Raiden, is contacted by his partner Rose, is where the iconic and somewhat infamous mantra of April 30th in the game is spoken. A bit after the start of the chapter of the game, the question is rephrased again. From here, the date is given narrative importance as it ties into events directly within the game, the story of it, and the game itself emphasizes the date in particular ways. The date in which the Plant Chapter begins, in-game, is April 29th, with the next day being April 30th. From all of this, it can be definitively said in a sense that the emphasis on dates within the game itself had an impact on the player base, and combined with how there was a massive amount of hype for Metal Gear Solid 2 at the time of its release, being one of the most hyped games in history, the important dates within the game would have naturally just stuck out. For this next point, I will be primarily talking about spoiler content. If you wish to play the game for yourself, I recommend skipping over this part and skipping to the timestamp that I listed on screen right now. I highly recommend that you play the game for yourself to understand exactly what I am trying to say here, because this is a fantastic game, and I really do not want people to spoil themselves on a plot that is arguably one of gaming's best. I'll provide a spoiler-free version of what I'll say here after this spoiler section, but here is the timestamp. From here, I'll be talking about spoilers. As I mentioned, throughout the game you are reminded of the importance of April 30th. On the day of the Plant Chapter, the second half of the game is said to be taking place on April 29th, that particular day. However, by the time the game escalates and the final parts of the game begin to occur, the date becomes April 30th, which in context of the series is around 200 or so years in which George Washington became the President of the United States. This is a fact that is mentioned in the game. In this part of the game, the antagonist of it is known as Solid Snake, who was the former President of the United States of America within the lore of the series. He is determined on killing Raiden, the protagonist, to go after the real big bad of the series known as the Patriots. On that exact day in the game, it has been 200 or so years ago since George Washington became the President of the United States. Solidus's plan is to have an actual say in being remembered, taking America back to its core roots before the Patriots took control and began to control and monitor everything. From here, Raiden is contacted directly by AIs of the Patriots, posing as both the Colonel, who commanded him throughout the game, and Rose, his partner. From here it's revealed that Raiden played exactly into their plans, and as a final objective, Raiden must kill Solidus. Raiden does as such, and the events of the game end. From here, Raiden and Solid Snake meet again, and eventually the core game ends with Raiden meeting Rose again, where this conversation happens.
I remember now. Today is the day I met you.
That's it.
After this, Solid Snake gives a speech in a post-credits scene about how life is more than passing on the genes of an individual. The game then ultimately ends on a cliffhanger with the revelation that the Patriots have actually been dead all along. It's with this in mind, and due to the twist that Raiden was in fact the protagonist that people will be playing as throughout the game, instead of Solid Snake, which had been promoted heavily in the marketing of the game, that upon the release of the game was not only successful but somewhat divisive amongst critics and the public. However, in time it has grown to be a game that has been respected for the many themes that it tries to portray. When it comes to April 30th, it can be said in a sense that due to the plot revelations and the thematic emphasis on freedom and how the plot pans out ultimately, that primarily the core reason for the date being remembered was the impact that the game directly had on those who had played it, the plot, the events that occur, the message it conveys. All of this was imprinted onto people as an experience back then that was relatively new and kind of shocking. It was a complete 180 from what people expected, a complete curveball. On a more cynical note, one of the 2009 articles that I mentioned before that details the game's connections to the date in more detail presents the alternative perspective, the amount of fooling that happened to the player when it comes to playing into the themes of the game by having their expectations broken is what plays into the fact that the date is so remembered. To quote it directly, Raiden's performance, and by extension the player's, is so perfect that his ability to be manipulated so complete that his behaviour pattern is used as the basis for the government's censorship program. Who is the model citizen that any police state would want? Someone who does everything they are told within Pavlovian precision, who goes through every room, collects every item, activates every cinematic, defeats every boss. Gamers, in their endless desire for gratification, are the perfect citizen. They just want to be told what to do and they'll be happy. Complacency as a player versus complacency as a citizen, selfishness in a relationship versus selfishness in a society, all these distinctions melt away in MGS2, leaving the player disgusted with oneself or wanting to be entertained. That's why Metal Gear Solid 2, MGS2, is a great game, and that's why every April 30th, gamers should be reminded of what other tools they are. End quote. With this perspective, even though it's more cynical, it makes sense. It can be said that April 30th is a date that a lot of people remember due to the idea of literally being fooled, literally playing into the plots of the game and given an experience unlike a lot of others. The story in game itself impacted people so much and left an impression that the day itself is remembered and celebrated because of it. The themes of the game are still relevant also, perhaps also being a notable incentive for why people remember this date so much. The historical relevancy also makes sense when you pair it up with the game as well. For any passionate Metal Gear fan looking at the date and taking all this into account, it kind of explains heavily why people remember this date, for a variety of different reasons. Looking at the date and celebrating it is an experience, something great to the Metal Gear fanbase. End spoiler. For those who skip to this part to avoid spoilers, the game and the date itself is remembered significantly due to the date correlating and tying into events of the game, in terms of the story. Since the game was significantly hyped up at the time, and was a sequel to a game which had already proven that games could be a fantastic medium for thought-provoking storytelling, whatever Metal Gear Solid 2 held within it was of immediate interest. Games before Metal Gear Solid 2 and the first Metal Gear Solid had existed, but this was one of the most notable ones, with a level of hype unprecedented at the time, and still very notable now. And its story is still thought about and remembered for what it is, with a lot of fantastic videos analysing the plot and dissecting it piece by piece, bit by bit. Even to this day, it's a game that's never really failed to be relevant, despite the fact that it's very old by now. When it comes to alternative reasons, it could be that since it's the most notable date within the game, fans latched onto it and as a result it became a sort of celebratory day for them. This is odd, as usually this kind of focus would be put on an anniversary, than a date far removed from when the game was released. But again, this game was an impactful one in the gaming landscape, and it makes a lot of sense for fans to latch on as a result. The idea of fans really celebrating the game via that day is there. The Reddit posts, the 4chan posts, even a presence on 9gag of all places. This game has been practically everywhere over the course of its net lifespan. Going onto Twitter, for example, and typing in a few key terms, you can see posts from 2021, this year as of the creation of this video, of people playing the game or discussing the game around that special date. Even in 2020, 2019, years before. Hell, even the developers of Metal Gear Rising, Platinum Games, recognized the importance of the date. The impact is there. I found a particular tweet from 2018 which does actually posit a really interesting question, and personally, I've never been myself, but if some of the Reddit comments that were noted before are taken into account, then I can imagine that even the location of Federal Hall has that kind of significance to Metal Gear fans. To quote Kaid Antonio from before, the Reddit user, from some of the more recent comments pertaining to April 30th's importance to MGS, quote, "I started celebrating and going to Federal Hall in person about 10 years ago. Celebrating fictional dates is usually normal for pop culture fandoms, but dates from stories/events that technically take place in the real world, in real world settings, might be more meaningful, especially for fans who live in some proximity to the places involved. I don't remember if anyone started this after the game's launch." With that being said, with the history noted down and even the importance of the game's connection to the date, one question ultimately does remain. Why should it ultimately matter? Why should it matter at all? To which I can say that from personal experience here, it matters for the fact that it's a game with such a potent importance for those who played it, that the fandom and community around it unofficially, perhaps without even realising, created April 30th as their way, their day, Metal Gear Solid 2's day, to celebrate the game's existence, to remember it. It doesn't have to matter on a global scale, it doesn't have to be this massively impactful thing like an actual anniversary. It doesn't have to go out there to change something or prove itself. At the very core, it's a conglomerate of passionate people who honour a game that had an impact on them and means practically everything to them. They remembered that day, they care about that day, and regardless of if it's necessary or not, I respect it massively. Even without my knowledge of just how far this day goes back in terms of its history, being as potentially as old as the game itself, I personally remember this day anyway. In the mid-2010s, I made it a habit to play the game on April 29th and finish on the 30th. Like I was experiencing the game's events itself by being a part of the events, and to many fans, that kind of means everything. I find it really sweet and actually kind of wholesome that a fanbase for an extremely serious series takes their time out of their lives each year to honour a game that is now going to be 20 years old as of the writing of this script, as of me saying this. This game came out 19 years ago, and for all that time, people have cherished it. Physical games may decay, the hardware will eventually die and be unplayable perhaps, but the internet will shift and change and morph into a different place from what it once was, but the passion people have for such games, such pieces of media, especially this one here, even celebrating it with a whole day, Metal Gear Solid 2's Day, is something that I personally believe should be cherished and respected and remembered. A day that people celebrate. One that goes back nearly 20 years with a passionate fan base behind it. It's something that should be seen and known, in my opinion. And I find that beautiful. To see a fandom really come together like this every year around that same time, it's something I absolutely love to see. There's one last thing that I feel like saying when it comes to this topic, because it applies to April 30th, MGS2 Day, relatively well. The ending speech of this game always kind of hit a note with me, as someone who really grew up to be a bit of an archivist, being a tad too obsessed perhaps with archiving things here, there and everywhere, using the internet to full capacity for at least some helpful means. There's a message of my own that I really want to give when it comes to this day, to a lot of things. I live for seeing out these odd and wonderful little events, these obscure little things. But when it comes to celebrating things, do so. Have fun with what you do. Show your love for the things you're into. Be comfy, be kind, and appreciate the things that you're into media-wise, because you're never invalid or wrong for loving those pieces of media or things you like in a comfy, appreciative way. The internet is growing up and the world is moving forward, but never be afraid to love the past while keeping it alive in the future, showing people such things existed to begin with. You have the magic of the digital era we live in to do that. Keeping the past alive and moving forward into the future are always one and the same.